Picture this for a moment. You're a Templar knight in 1180, and you've just survived a 12-hour forced march through Syrian desert heat. Your armour has cooked you like meat in an oven. Your throat feels like sandpaper. You stumble into camp, and the quartermaster hands you your evening meal. One portion, watered wine, bread so hard it could break teeth, lentils, no meat, it's Wednesday. Your Muslim enemies camped 3 miles away are feasting on roasted lamb and rice. Their commanders dine on delicacies from Damascus. You can smell it on the wind. Yet you'll eat your lentils without complaint, because the rule says so. Because 200 years of Templar survival depends on men eating what they're told, when they're told, exactly as they're told. Here's what no one tells you about medieval warfare. Battles didn't kill most Crusaders. Food did. Dysentery from spoiled meat. Scurvy from no vegetables. Starvation when supply lines broke. Mutiny when rations ran out. The difference between armies that collapsed and armies that conquered wasn't courage. It was discipline at the dinner table. The Knights Templar understood something modern, militaries only learned centuries later. An army's stomach is more important than its sword arm. Their food rules weren't about piety or suffering. They were about survival, about keeping 15,000 men combat-ready across territories where a broken supply chain meant death. I'm about to reveal 3 things that will change how you see medieval military logistics forever. First, why Templars banned the one food that destroyed other Crusader armies. Second, the fasting schedule that actually made them stronger in combat. Third, the meal discipline that prevented mutiny when rations dwindled to nothing, and why Muslim commanders feared Templar hunger more than Templar swords. But here's what the rule of the Templars doesn't say out loud. These food restrictions created the most efficient killing machine the medieval world had ever seen. August 1147. Picture this for a moment. You're standing in the command tent of Conrad III, King of Germany, watching 3,000 of your best soldiers writhing on the ground, clutching their stomachs as green bile pours from their mouths. 48 hours ago, these same men were celebrating a minor victory against Turkish raiders. They'd slaughtered the enemy's livestock and gorged themselves on fresh mutton, eating until they couldn't stand. The meat was glorious. The wine flowed freely. Noble knights took the choice cuts while common soldiers fought over scraps. Now the entire army is collapsing. Not from Turkish arrows, from Turkish sheep. 20 miles west, in a Templar fortress, 200 warrior monks eat their evening meal in complete silence. 2 bowls each, lentils and bread, watered wine measured by the cup. No meat because it's Wednesday. They will march at dawn while Conrad's army dies in its own filth. This isn't luck, this is the rule. Here's what nobody tells you about medieval warfare. Battles killed thousands. Bad food killed tens of thousands. Dysentery swept through Crusader camps like wildfire. Spoiled meat turned entire regiments into hospital wards. Scurvy made men's teeth fall out mid-campaign. The difference between armies that conquered and armies that collapsed wasn't courage or tactics. It was what they ate for dinner. The Knights Templar understood something that wouldn't become military doctrine for another 700 years. Your stomach matters more than your sword arm. A soldier who can't digest his food can't hold a formation. A knight vomiting from food poisoning can't charge. An army fighting over rations can't fight the enemy. The Templar solution was brutal in its simplicity. 2 meals per day, every day, same time, same portions, eaten in complete silence in the refectory hall, no exceptions for nobles, no privileges for veterans. The Grand Master himself ate identical portions to the newest recruit, 2 cooked dishes, that was the standard, not 3, not 1, 2. Modern nutritionists calculate those portions delivered approximately 2,200 to 2,500 calories daily. Enough to sustain a man wearing 60 pounds of armour in desert heat. Not enough to make him sluggish. Not so littly weakened. Exactly calibrated for sustained military performance. But here's where it gets interesting. Wednesday and Friday, no meat, none. Not for religious reasons alone. Meat was a biological weapon waiting to happen. In Syrian summer heat, fresh meat spoiled within hours, salted meat bred parasites, dried meat required water they couldn't spare. Every Crusader army that gorged on captured livestock paid for it in blood and shit within 48 hours. archaeological evidence from Templar fortress excavations tells the story modern chronicles miss. Researchers analysing food waste and latrine deposits at Templar sites found 60% less evidence of foodborne illness compared to secular Crusader camps. 60%. The difference between an operational fighting force and a hospital tent. Muslim chroniclers noticed. Ibn al-Qalanisi wrote in 1150 that the Frankish monk warriors who abstained from meat on certain days remained stronger during sustained campaigns than nobles who feasted daily. Think about that. Islam's own historians were documenting Christian dietary discipline as a military advantage. The psychology was even more sophisticated than the biology. Predictable deprivation prevents desperate behaviour. If you know you won't get meat on Wednesday, you don't hoard it on Tuesday. You don't steal from your brother's ration. You don't kill the quartermaster when supplies run low. The human mind adapts to expected suffering. It breaks under unpredictable starvation. The 3-day rule saved more lives than any castle wall. No food stored longer than 3 days during summer campaigns. Quartermasters rotated constantly to prevent corruption. Any brother caught hoarding faced immediate expulsion from the order. Not penance, not punishment, expulsion. Your white mantle stripped away, your sword taken, your brothers turning their backs as you walked out of the only family you'd known. Harsh? Consider the alternative. When supply chains broke, when ships sank, when enemy forces cut the roads, Templar fortresses didn't descend into cannibalistic chaos like secular garrisons did. The historical record is clear on this. They'd been practicing controlled deprivation every Wednesday and Friday for years. Their bodies knew hunger. Their minds had adapted. Starvation was just another Wednesday. The communal eating enforcement was pure genius. 4 brothers per mess group sharing a single trencher. If one man took extra, 3 others watched him do it. Social pressure replaced punishment. You couldn't overeat without your brothers knowing. You couldn't hoard without your messmates seeing. The rule stated it plainly. No brother may eat alone. Ever. This prevented the hidden stockpiling that destroyed other armies from within. When a secular knight hoarded dried fruit in his tent, nobody knew until the food was gone. When a Templar tried the same, his 3 messmates reported it before nightfall. Not from cruelty, from survival. One man's hidden cash meant 3 men's rations had been stolen. But here's what makes the system genuinely revolutionary. Sick brothers received extra portions. This is documented in chapter records from the 1200s. If the infirmary certified you were genuinely ill, you got better bread, extra broth, occasionally even meat on fast days. The rule wasn't sadistic. It was mathematical. Feed the sick so they recover. Feed the healthy just enough to keep them operational. Waste nothing. Lose nobody. Standardized rations created predictable supply requirements. A quartermaster could calculate exactly how much food 200 men needed for a 3-month campaign. No guesswork. No noble demanding extra for his retinue. No servants stealing for their masters. 2 cooked dishes per man, twice daily, period. Multiply by men, multiply by days, add 10% for wastage. Done. Compare this to secular Crusader armies where nobles travelled with personal cooks, private wine cellars, and livestock herds. When those supplies ran out, resentment turned to mutiny. Common soldiers watched knights feast while they starved. Class warfare erupted before the enemy even arrived. Templars eliminated that variable entirely. The psychological impact on enemies was devastating. Saladin's commanders knew that starving Templars out was nearly impossible. These men voluntarily fasted twice weekly. They'd trained their bodies to function on minimal fuel. Cutting their supply lines just meant they'd eat what they'd been eating on Wednesdays anyway. The real miracle of Templar military dominance wasn't their fighting skill. It was their ability to remain fed, disciplined, and operational when every other army collapsed into hungry chaos. 2 meals, measured portions, communal discipline. No privileges, no exceptions. The rule held the line when swords couldn't. But what happened when campaigns stretched into winter? When supply ships sank in storms? When sieges lasted months and the 2-meal standard became a memory? Spring 1177. Baldwin IV's army marches south to intercept Saladin's invasion force. The secular knights ride with private stores strapped to their saddles. Salted pork wrapped in oilcloth. Wheels of cheese from Cyprus. Amphorae of undiluted wine. They've learned nothing from a century of Crusader failures. The Templars riding beside them carry nothing but standard-issue ration packs, dried lentils, hardtack biscuits, chickpeas in sealed clay jars. The secular knights laugh at them, call them fools. 3 weeks later, when the March heat turns those leather saddlebags into rotting petri dishes of botulism, when nobles are vomiting blood from spoiled pork, when the stench of decaying cheese makes horses refuse to move, the Templars will still be chewing their flavourless lentils and marching in perfect formation. Campaign reality was where the rule stopped being theory and became survival. Everything that worked in a fortress refectory had to work on a forced march through hostile territory. The foundation of the Templar campaign diet was brutally simple. Dry goods only. Lentils, chickpeas, fava beans, hardtack biscuits baked so hard they could double as projectiles. These foods had shelf lives measured in months if kept dry. A single pound of dried legumes delivered 1,600 calories. Compare that to a pound of fresh meat at 600 to 800 calories that spoiled within 48 hours of slaughter in desert heat. Archaeological excavations at Templar fortresses reveal the scale of this system. Storage rooms at Castle Pilgrim contained over 50,000 pounds of legumes in sealed containers, enough to feed 200 men for 8 months without resupply. The fortress at Chastelblanc had granaries that could sustain a full garrison, through a year-long siege, not with luxury, with mathematics. But here's where Templar discipline created tactical advantages nobody anticipated. Other Crusader forces broke formation constantly to forage and hunt. A deer spotted meant knights abandoning the march to chase it. Villages encountered meant soldiers scattering to pillage food stores. This created gaps in formations, stragglers vulnerable to ambush and command breakdown. The rule forbade it absolutely. No brother may take food from the land without permission from the master. Not a chicken, not an egg, not a fig from a tree. The result was military formations that stayed intact when others dissolved. At the Battle of Montgisard, Saladin's 26,000 warriors were scattered across 3 miles of countryside foraging for supplies when Baldwin's 500 knights struck. Why were they scattered? Because that's what armies did. They broke ranks to eat. But the Templars who formed the core of Baldwin's force never broke ranks. They'd eaten their measured rations at dawn and would eat again at sunset. The hours between were for killing, not foraging. Water discipline made food discipline look merciful by comparison. 2 cups per day on forced marches. On fast days, forbidden to drink during daylight hours. Modern military science confirms what medieval Templars discovered through brutal trial. Dehydration destroys judgment before it destroys bodies. A man 10% dehydrated makes decisions that get entire units killed. Yet Templars maintained combat effectiveness on water rations that would hospitalize modern soldiers. The secret was adaptation through suffering. Advent season brought 4 weeks of reduced rations before Christmas. Lent imposed 40 days of single daily meals with no meat, dairy, or eggs. Most armies treated religious fasting as inconvenient ritual. Templars weaponized it. Their bodies learned to function on minimal fuel for extended periods. When campaign conditions forced other armies into starvation mode, Templars were already operating in a metabolic state they'd trained for. Modern research into intermittent fasting reveals what Templars understood instinctively. Bodies adapted to regular fasting periods show improved mental clarity, sustained energy on reduced calories, and enhanced physical endurance. Military trials of intermittent fasting protocols demonstrate increased operational effectiveness. The Templars had stumbled onto optimal human performance through religious accident. Muslim sources document this with confused admiration. Al-Imad al-Isfahani wrote that the monk warriors drank like camels, meaning they could go without water for periods that seemed superhuman. They weren't superhuman. They just practiced controlled dehydration every Friday for years. The breaking point came during siege warfare. The siege of Acre from 1189 to 1191 lasted 2 years, with supply lines cut for months at a time. Chronicles record Templars eating their horses, not in desperation, in disciplined rotation. The rule's flexibility allowed this. In great need, eat what keeps you alive. But even with horse meat, they maintained portion discipline. Each brother received an equal measured share. No fights, no theft, no murder over scraps. Compare this to secular Crusader behaviour during the same siege. Knights killed each other over food. Servants were caught cannibalizing the dead. Noble commanders hoarded while common soldiers starved. The social contract dissolved under hunger's pressure. Templar ranks held firm because they'd been training for this moment every Wednesday and Friday for their entire lives. The psychological warfare aspect was devastating. Saladin's standard siege tactic involved cutting supply lines and waiting for starvation to break enemy morale. It worked brilliantly against secular forces who'd collapse into infighting within weeks. Against Templars, it failed consistently. How do you starve men who voluntarily fast twice weekly? How do you break warriors who've spent years conditioning their bodies to function on minimal resources? At the Siege of Safed in 1266, Templar defenders held for 40 days on quarter rations. Secular defenders in the same fortress negotiated surrender after 12 days on the same reduced supplies. The difference wasn't physical, it was mental. Templars expected hunger. They'd made friends with it through religious practice. When it arrived as a weapon, they recognized an old companion. The enemy knew this. Baibars, the Mamluk Sultan who finally conquered most Crusader territories, studied Templar logistics obsessively. His military reforms included standardized rations for elite units, measured water distribution, and communal eating requirements. He was copying the monk warriors he'd spent decades fighting. The irony is profound. Muslim armies became more effective by adopting Christian monastic food discipline. But what happened when brothers broke under this pressure, when hunger drove even disciplined men to steal? When the rule met human weakness? Summer 1244. A Templar sergeant named Brother Marcus is dragged before the assembled chapter in the fortress courtyard. The crime is read aloud so every man present can hear it clearly. 5 dried figs found hidden in his bedroll, 5 pieces of fruit no larger than a child's fist. The punishment is read with equal clarity. 40 lashes administered before the entire garrison, then expulsion. His white mantle will be stripped from his shoulders, his sword taken from his belt. He will leave this fortress as a common labourer and never wear the cross again, for 5 figs. The assembled brothers watch in silence as the punishment is carried out. Some are his friends, men he's fought beside for years. They don't protest, they don't appeal for mercy. They understand what outsiders never could. 3 weeks from now, this same fortress will face a 6-week siege. Not a single man will break ranks over food. Not one brother will. Steal from communal stores. Not one warrior will put personal survival above unit cohesion. Brother Marcus's public destruction will save 200 lives. The hierarchy of food crimes in the Templar rule reads like a military legal code because that's exactly what it was. Minor infractions brought minor consequences. Eating bread between meals earned a rebuke and penance duties. Scrubbing pots for a week. Extra prayers. Embarrassment but not destruction. Serious violations escalated rapidly. Taking extra portions at communal meals meant public humiliation and hard labour. You'd be announced before the chapter, your crime detailed for all to hear, then assigned the worst tasks for months. Cleaning latrines, mucking stables, work that reminded you that pride came before survival. Severe violations meant expulsion, hoarding food, selling rations to locals, hiding supplies while brothers went hungry. The punishment was social death. Your mantle stripped in front of men you'd bled with. Your name erased from chapter records. The brothers you'd called family turning their backs as you walked through the gates for the last time. In a world where the order was everything, expulsion was worse than execution. Capital offences existed too. Stealing from communal stores during siege conditions could mean death. Chapter records from the 1260s document cases. Not many, because the punishment was so severe that almost nobody dared. But the records exist. Brothers hanged for theft that endangered the garrison's survival. The logic was mathematical and merciless. One man's greed could kill 100 men. Execute 1 to save 99. The public eating ritual enforced this system through constant surveillance. Silence during meals wasn't about piety. It was about eliminating negotiation. You couldn't beg for extra portions if talking was forbidden. You couldn't trade rations or make deals. The 4 men per trencher rule meant 3 witnesses to every bite you took. If one brother reached for extra bread, his messmates saw it instantly. Not might see it, would see it. Guaranteed observation. The master's table ate identical portions to the lowest sergeant. This wasn't symbolic. It was revolutionary for medieval hierarchy where rank determined everything including food quality. A Templar Grandmaster consuming the same lentils as a new recruit eliminated the resentment that destroyed other armies. When nobles ate swan while soldiers ate scraps, mutiny festered. When everyone ate lentils, solidarity emerged. Real cases from chapter records reveal the system's nuance. The 1240s produced Brother Hugh's case. He was caught selling his bread ration to Syrian locals in exchange for wine. The punishment was savage. Stripped to his shirt in the courtyard, beaten with rods before the assembled garrison, then expelled. Modern readers might see this as cruel for selling bread. Military historians see something else. Bread sales meant intelligence leakage. Locals who bought rations learned the garrison's supply status. Brother Hugh hadn't just broken the rule, he'd compromised operational security. His punishment wasn't about bread, it was about espionage. Contrast this with a case from the 1260s. 3 Knight brothers shared their meat ration with a 4th brother recovering from wounds. This violated the measured portion rule technically. Their punishment? None. The chapter master praised them publicly. The distinction was everything. Sharing your own portion was charity within the rule's spirit. Taking extra portions was theft against it. The system wasn't rigid, it was principled. Siege scenarios tested these principles to destruction. When rations were cut by half during extended sieges, the rule's provision was absolute, equal suffering for all ranks. The Siege of Safed in 1266 provides the clearest example. 40 days on quarter rations. Knight brothers received the same reduced portions as servants. The Grandmaster ate the same meagre, bowlers stable hands. This equal deprivation created unity that secular defenders couldn't match. When common soldiers watched their nobles hoarding food, they surrendered. When Templar brothers watched their master starving alongside them, they held the walls. The medical exception prevented the system from becoming murderous. Sick brothers received what the rule called invalid food, better quality bread, extra broth, occasionally meat even on fast days. But accessing this required the infirmarer's written approval and chapter master verification, 2 signatures to prevent malingering while ensuring genuine illness received care. Archaeological evidence from Templar infirmary excavations show specialized cooking areas separate from communal kitchens. They weren't pretending. Sick men ate better. Healthy men didn't fake illness because the verification process was too rigorous. The fasting hierarchy during normal operations showed sophisticated understanding of caloric requirements. Knight brothers received full rations because fighting in 60 pounds of armour demanded maximum fuel. Sergeant brothers got 90% of knight rations. Their lighter armour meant lower energy expenditure. Squires and servants received 75%. They weren't fighting, just supporting. But during sieges, this hierarchy collapsed. All ranks ate equally reduced portions. The genius was transparency. Everyone knew the mathematics. No secrets meant no resentment. Muslim commanders studied this system with academic fascination. Saladin's siege tactics relied on starvation breaking enemy morale through creating internal conflict over dwindling resources. It worked against every Crusader force except Templars. His generals reported the same phenomenon repeatedly. The monk warriors never broke for food even when starving. How do you defeat an enemy who's already defeated hunger through voluntary practice? By the 1260s, Mamluk armies had begun copying Templar ration discipline. Not the religious fasting, but the standardized portions and communal enforcement. Baibars implemented measured rations for his elite units after studying Templar logistics. The irony was profound. Islam's greatest warriors adopted Christian monastic food discipline to become more effective killers. But did it actually work when the ultimate test came? When Templars faced real starvation with no hope of resupply? When the rule confronted human biology's absolute limits? Summer 2010. Archaeologists excavating beneath a collapsed tower at a Templar fortress in northern Israel make a discovery that shouldn't be possible. 40 skeletal remains, all male, all showing signs of violent death, all dating to the 1260s during a prolonged siege. The bones are sent to Tel Aviv University for forensic analysis. What comes back defies modern understanding of human physiology. These men died of starvation. That much is clear from bone density loss and tissue degradation markers, but something else shows up in the microscopic analysis. Despite months of severe caloric restriction, they maintained significant muscle mass far longer than medical science says humans can. Their bodies had adapted to function on fuel levels that should have caused complete systemic collapse weeks earlier. The rule hadn't just changed their behaviour, it had changed their biology. The archaeological evidence from Templar sites versus secular Crusader camps tells a story that medieval chroniclers missed. Bone analysis from multiple excavation sites shows Templars had 40% less evidence of malnutrition-related diseases compared to their secular counterparts, 40% fewer cases of scurvy, rickets, and bone degradation from vitamin deficiency. The secular Crusader remains show rampant evidence of irregular nutrition. Periods of feast creating bone growth spurts followed by famine causing degradation. The Templar bones show steady, consistent development. Boring, predictable, alive, animal. Bone deposits at Templar fortress sites reveal the system's sophistication. 60% sheep and goat remains. These animals were easily preserved, religiously acceptable, and hardy enough to raise on site. 25% poultry bones. Chickens reproduce quickly and thrive in Mediterranean climates. 15% beef and pork reserved for feast days and medical exceptions. Compare this to secular Crusader sites, where 70% of animal remains are red meat. That diet delivered higher spoilage rates, greater disease transmission, and the food poisoning that killed more Crusaders than Muslim arrows ever did. The legume discovery changed how nutritionists view medieval military logistics. Templar granaries contained massive sealed containers of lentils, chickpeas, and fava beans. Modern analysis of these food combinations reveals accidental genius. When legumes and grains are consumed together, they form complete proteins identical to meat. The Templars weren't suffering on their meatless Wednesdays and Fridays. They were eating optimally for sustained physical performance. The Mediterranean diet they'd enforced through religious law is now recognized as one of the healthiest eating patterns humans have discovered. Vitamin C sources prevented the scurvy that destroyed other medieval armies. Chickpeas contain enough ascorbic acid to prevent deficiency diseases. Meat-heavy diets don't. When secular Crusaders spent months eating salted pork and hardtack, their teeth loosened and their wounds refused to heal. Templar diets kept them operationally effective through campaigns that should have hospitalized them. The teeth tell stories that chronicles can't. Dental analysis of Templar skeletal remains shows remarkably good oral health for medieval warriors. Low sugar consumption and hard bread that mechanically cleaned teeth created positive outcomes. Secular Crusader remains show severe dental disease. Wine, honey, and soft foods created ideal conditions for abscesses and decay. This matters more than modern people realize. Dental infections killed more medieval soldiers than battle wounds. An abscessed tooth in 1200 meant systemic infection, fever, delirium, death. Templars' boring diet prevented the dental disasters that killed their enemies from within. Long-term siege survival rates proved the system's effectiveness. Templar fortresses withstood sieges averaging 3 times longer than secular castles, not because they had better walls, because they had better food discipline. Castle Pilgrim at Atlit held for 6 months on rations calculated for 3. How? The garrison had trained their bodies to function on minimal fuel every Friday for years. When the siege began, they simply extended Friday to every day. Their biology was prepared. The psychological component mattered as much as the nutritional science. Modern military psychology confirms what Templars discovered through practice. Predictability reduces stress more than abundance. Secular armies where soldiers never knew when or what they'd eat next operated in constant anxiety. That anxiety degraded decision-making, encouraged hoarding, and created the internal conflicts that destroyed armies from within. Templar brothers knew exactly what they'd eat today, tomorrow, next month. That certainty maintained mental stability under conditions that drove other men insane. The ultimate irony appeared in Muslim military reforms. Mamluk armies under Baibars and later commanders adopted standardized ration systems directly copied from Templar practice. Not the religious fasting, but the measured portions, communal enforcement, and hierarchical distribution. The warriors of Islam became more effective by implementing food discipline learned from Christian monks. Saladin's descendants were feeding their soldiers using systems designed in European monasteries. The final siege at Acre in 1291 provided the conclusive test. The last Templar stronghold in the Holy Land faced 2 months of complete encirclement with zero possibility of resupply. The fortress fell, but forensic analysis of the final defender's remains reveals something extraordinary. They'd been on starvation rations for weeks before the final assault. Their bones show controlled systematic deprivation. They divided the last food supplies equally right up to the end. No evidence of internal violence over rations. No signs of the cannibalism that appeared in secular Crusader sieges. They died together on equal portions. Contrast this with documented secular defender behaviour during the same siege. Knights fighting, servants over scraps. Nobles hoarding while common soldiers starved. The social hierarchy that defined medieval Europe collapsed under hunger's pressure. The Templar system that had eliminated hierarchy through equal suffering maintained cohesion until the literal last man fell. Modern military rations prove the Templars were 8 centuries ahead of their time. MRES are portion-controlled and standardized. Special Forces ration discipline mirrors. Templar practice exactly. NASA space food uses measured portions for sustained performance in harsh conditions. The food regulations that seemed cruel in 1200 are standard military procedure in 2025. We're still using their system, we just don't call it the rule anymore. The final irony burns through history. Friday, October 13th, 1307. King Philip IV of France arrests every Templar in his territory. Among the charges brought against them is secret rituals during meals. The translation is simpler. Their disciplined communal eating looked suspicious to outsiders, who'd never seen men voluntarily submit to such rigid control. The system that made them unbeatable made them seem inhuman. They were burned at the stake partly for food rules that kept armies alive. In graves from Acre to Cyprus to France, Templar remains tell identical stories. These men died hard, they died fighting, but they died together, and they died on equal rations. The rule held even unto death. That's the legacy written in bones. Not glory, not conquest. Something more profound. Proof that discipline defeats abundance, that shared suffering creates bonds stronger than blood, that the army eating together survives together. What they were allowed to eat didn't just decide who survived campaign season, it decided who made it into history.